So, for this topic, we're really going to be diving in and looking at what percent means and different ways that we can use percent to solve problems. So, for this lesson, we can understand percent by representing and finding percent of a whole. So, if we take a look at this album share, it says Patrick's family ate a whole vegetable pizza for dinner. Each person ate one slice of the pizza. If each slice was exactly the same size, show how the pizza was cut for four people. What fraction of the pizza did each person have? So if I go ahead and I do this, so each slice is going to be the same size. And so there's four slices total. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to divide this into fourths as best I can. Notice that that wasn't truly even. So I'll go back and I'll fix it to where it's more even, to where it's about half the pie. Boy, I'm really struggling with that. Let's try this again. So maybe I'll go this way first. Okay, there we go. There's about my half. There's about my half. So as even as I possible, what fraction did each person eat? Well, if I divide it into four equal or as close to equal as I can, each person is going to end up eating 1/4 of the pizza. Now, when we talk about 1/4 and we look at what a percent is going to be, we can write this as a decimal. So 1/4 is going to be equal to 25 hundredths. And then from there, what I can do is I can take my 25 hundredths and I could write that as a percent, and it would be 25%. So each person would have eaten 25% of the whole pizza. Okay, so let's move down to your look back. Suppose one person ate half of the pizza. How can I write this fraction in another way to represent part of the whole pizza? So if they ate a half of the pizza, okay? So if I write that, represent that part of another way, so another way that I could write it is I could write it as a decimal, or I could write it as a percent. So when I'm talking about writing it as another way, I'm really looking at a different form. So if I wrote this as a decimal, it would be 0.5 or half of the pizza, which would then be 50%. Okay. And so that's really what we're going to be diving into is we're going to be diving into what does a percent mean. And so if we move into our visual learning, a percent is going to mean part or per 100. So we break it down into what it means. So cent, so this word means 100. So if I have percent, what it means is it means per 100. So it's a rate in which we're comparing the first term to 100. So I can write this in three different ways. I can write a percent as a percent. So I could write it as 50%. I could write it as a fraction. So it's 1/2. I'm still comparing. Notice I'm still comparing my first term to my second term. Or I could write it as a decimal, which would be 0.5 or 0.50. Both of those represent 50%. Okay, so it says a percent is compared to 100. The percent is the number of hundredths that represents part of a whole because it's per 100. So it's going out to the hundredths place value. We'll look at what it is if I go out to the thousands place value or the 10,000s place value, how we would write that percent. So what percent of people prefer bright white toothpaste? So if we take a look, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7 out of 10. So if I write this as a fraction, 7 out of 10, I'm going to convert that into a decimal. And the reason that I convert that into a decimal is because it allows me to see what the percent is going to be. So remember that percent means per 100. This is only the tens place value. So what I can do to help me get to the hundreds place values, I can add a 0, which is then going to be equal to 70%. Okay, they show us a couple different ways that we can represent a percent. And so if we take a look at the ways that we can represent it, the first way is to create a grid. So I'm going to create 7/10, which equals 70 hundredths. So by shading in 7 rows of 10, that's 70 hundredths, which equals 100% because it's per 100. If I write them on number lines, 7 to 10, and then I create a number line with 100, 70 to 100. 7/10 is equal to 70 hundredths, which equals 70%. And then another way would be what we did, which is where we took 7/10, We converted it into a decimal. They converted it into a percent. So we ended up with 70 hundredths equals 70%. So again, I cannot stress this enough. Percent is always compared to 100. Always, always, always. Percent means per 100. Okay. When using an equivalent fraction to find the percent, why do you write the 100 as a denominator? Again, can't stress this enough. We write it as a denominator because percent is always out of 100. So by writing it as a denominator of 100, it's allowing me to find the equivalent percent. So when I write the ratio with a denominator of 100, the percent is always out of 100. So I write 100 as a denominator because percent is always, always, always out of 100. All right, so let's move into your guided practice. And so really today is going to be about just visually looking at it, and then we're going to start doing some work with converting between the different forms of percents as well. So if we take a look at this, look at my number line. So each line segment represents 100%, but is a different length. Use equivalent rates to find the percent or part of each line segment that points A and B represent. So here, this is out of 2 inches equals 100%. Here, to 1 inch, or sorry, 4 inches is equal to 100%. So point A is going to be half of the number line. So point A represents 50%. Point B, if you look, I have 1, 2, 3, 4. So it represents 1/4 of the number line, which is equal to 25%. Notice here I multiplied 4 times 25. Here I multiplied 2 times 50 to get to 100. So we're looking for ways to get to 100. When writing percent as a fraction, what number do you write as the whole or the denominator? Again, we always, always, always write it as 100 and then simplify it if we can. But for today's purposes, you're going to write it out of 100. Okay. Why are tenths, fifths, fourths, halves easy to convert to a percent? So if I have a tenth, if I have a fifth, if I have a fourth, and if I have a half, why are those easy to convert to percents? And they're easy to convert to percents because 10, 5, 4, and 2 are all factors of 100. And as we get further in this unit, we'll talk about what do we do when they are not easy factors or factors of 100, and how do we find the percent then. Okay. In 3 and 4, write the percent of each figure shaded. So if we count my total amount, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I have out of 10, so I'm going to write it as a fraction first. And then I have 4 shaded in. To get to 100, I would multiply this by 10. So this becomes 40 out of 100, or 40%. Okay, so number 3 is going to be 40%. All right, if we take a look at our last one, we need to see what I have. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I have 7 shaded in out of 100. That's a hundreds grid. So my denominator is already 100. So this is going to be equal to 7%. So on your independent practice, you are going to do the same thing. You're going to fill in the model. So it's going to look a little bit different. You're going to fill in the model to represent the percent. So what would 14% look like? What would 77% look like? What would 20% look like? So on the 20%, my recommendation would be to write it as a fraction. So 20 over 100, and then reduce by a value until you get to the number of boxes that you need, and then that will tell you how many boxes to shade in. So your independent practice and math practices and problem solving, you are actually going to just go ahead and do 5 through 7, or 5 through 14 all.